Chapter 1. The Scream in the Drawing Room and Beatrice. Are you? The sentence ended in a scream. Madeline Gray stumbled backward from the drawing room door, one gloved hand pressed tightly over her mouth. The maid, Elsie, came running from the kitchen, nearly colliding with her. She's not moving, Maddie stammered. She's sitting there, just staring at nothing. Elsie crept forward, leaned around the frame of the door, and gasped, "Oh, my word." Within moments, the vicarage bell was ringing. By the time Inspector Wren arrived with a constable in tow, the house had been emptied of its nervous onlookers. The body remained untouched, just as Maddie had found it. Beatrice Worsley, seated, upright at the piano, her back rigid, eyes fixed wide upon the empty sheet music before her. Her hands rested on her lap. Her mouth was parted just slightly, as if the final word she'd meant to utter had caught upon her breath. "No wound," Wren said, eyeing her neck and arms with practiced detachment. "No blood. Doesn't look like a struggle either. Must've been a stroke or her heart giving way." "I would not be so hasty," came a voice from behind. Inspector Wren turned. Hercule Poirot, short, compact, and immaculately dressed in grey wool, stood just within the hallway, his eyes resting on the late singer's still form. "You are?" "I am Hercule Poirot," he said, mildly, "a guest of the Reverend Chiswick, just across the road. I was in the middle of taking tea when the screams began. The maid told me pardon. I have a curiosity where unnatural death is concerned." Wren gave him a long, flat look. "And you're suggesting this isn't natural?" Poirot stepped gently into the room, nodding once to Maddie, who sat on the edge of a footstool, white as snow. "Mademoiselle, my condolences. She was fine last night," Maddie said, voice barely a whisper. "We argued, yes, but she was well enough. I came down this morning to apologize, and found her like that." Poirot nodded politely, then approached the body. He stood a good pace away, never touching, but leaned in to examine the angle of the head, the hands, the position of the feet. He turned abruptly. "Do you smell it?" "Smell what?" Wren asked, frowning. Poirot pointed toward the window. "Faint, almost gone now. But almond, is it not?" Wren blinked, then leaned forward, sniffing. "Could be something she was wearing, or something. In the room, old ladies do like floral scents. This is not floral. It is bitter. The faint trace of cyanide, I believe." Maddie jerked upright. "Cyanide? Precisely. The scent fades quickly, but it was stronger near the vent." He pointed toward the narrow heater vent set into the wooden panel just beneath the open window. Wren straightened up. "Right. Enough of this detective theater. The woman is dead, and there's no reason to believe it's anything but natural. She was elderly, high-strung. Forgive me," Poirot interrupted gently. "But Madame Worsley was not elderly. She was 62, by your village records. Healthy by all accounts, and poised in death as if interrupted in a thought, not seized by convulsions. Her hands show no sign of clutching at her chest or throat. No glass nearby. No vial." Wren grunted. "Still doesn't prove murder." "No," Poirot replied, moving to the piano stool. "But I believe Madame was poisoned, and not by ingestion." by inhalation. That silenced the room. The constable stepped back slightly. Maddie looked nauseous. Poirot's eyes moved to Beatrice's lap. She is holding something. Wren moved forward. I'll take it. From her left hand. Carefully pried open, emerged a small piece of folded parchment. It was not torn or crumpled, just tightly clutched. As if reflexively, Wren unfolded it and read aloud. The whisper she gave last night has frozen more than the room. Poirot exhaled softly. Curious, Maddie shivered. That's her writing. I know it, but I didn't see her write it. I don't understand. She said something to you last night, Poirot asked gently. We exchanged words. She called me foolish. She said I had no discipline, that I would never deserve what she had given me. What had she given you? Maddie hesitated. Shelter, some money, a future. Poirot tilted his head. And then she dismissed me, sent me to bed. Nothing more. Maddie looked at him for a long moment, and then looked away. No. Poirot's eyes drifted once again to the note. She referred to a whisper. Given last night. Mademoiselle, did she say anything that could be interpreted as revelatory, threatening? No. Maddie said quickly. She was always like that, cryptic, sharp-tongued. But she didn't. She didn't mean things half the time. Yet she meant this. Wren folded the note. Look, we'll take the body for examination, but this doesn't prove foul play. Until a coroner says otherwise, we'll assume natural causes. Poirot nodded slightly. But I beg of you, Inspector, before you close this room entirely, may I request that nothing be touched further. Let the room remain precisely as it is until the cause is confirmed. Wren hesitated. What are you hoping to find? Poirot smiled faintly. Sometimes, monsieur, it is not what you find, but what you no longer smell. He turned to Maddie, then looked once more at the vent, its metal surface gleaming dully in the cold daylight. She was not only killed by a whisper, Poirot said quietly. She left behind one of her own. And with that, he stepped back from the piano, letting the silence settle heavy, expectant. Chapter 2. A note clutched in her hand. I don't understand what any of this means, Maddie murmured as she rose from the stool, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't well, perhaps. She had a habit of talking in riddles. Poirot offered her a faint smile. But even riddles, mademoiselle, reveal truths if one listens carefully. Inspector Wren, meanwhile, turned the note over in his gloved hand. Nothing else on it, no signature, just the line. He passed it to the constable. Take this into evidence, and make sure the heating unit's logged and checked. If Monsieur Poirot is correct, and I'm not saying he is, we'll need the vent examined. For trace toxins, Poirot nodded. Also the windowsill. The breeze would have interfered with a clean dispersion. But the position of the piano, it's curious. Wren narrowed his eyes. You think someone used the vent to release poison into the room? Poirot raised one hand. I do not think, not yet, but I wonder, madam. Worsley was seated. She did not move from her place. There was no struggle, but she knew something. The note suggests that much. She experienced a whisper, one that froze her, in more ways than one. And what of it? Wren said. could be metaphor. You said yourself she had a flair for drama. Yes, but Madame Worsley's whispers were never wasted. Poirot's tone remained thoughtful. Her reputation preceded her, did it not? Mademoiselle. Maddie blinked. What do you mean? I mean, your aunt was a woman who did not raise her voice. And yet, he glanced down at the lifeless figure. She could command silence. One whisper from her could unravel a man. She knew the power of words withheld, and she chose carefully when to release them. Wren exhaled. So we're to believe someone feared what she might reveal. Poirot didn't answer. He stepped closer to the piano and carefully inspected the surface. A shallow mark marred the polished wood. Just above the stool half-moon in shape, a glass, Poirot murmured. Or a cup, removed hastily. She didn't drink anything before bed, Maddie said, watching him. She was on a diet, no alcohol, no sweets, just tea, and even that she prepared herself. Poirot's eyes drifted across the room, to a sideboard where a small silver tray stood with a single teacup. He walked over, his fingers hovering above the porcelain rim. She always sat at the piano before bed, Maddie added, her voice softening. Every night, she called it her ritual. She didn't play anymore, not really, but she'd sit there, hum, and think. She said this silence helped her remember. Poirot turned back toward her. Then whoever meant her harm would have known. That habit, knew where she would sit, knew she would not move. Wren was scribbling in his notebook. We'll test the cup and the tray for any traces. Constable, sir. The man nodded and moved to bag the items. Poirot's attention turned once again to the heater vent. He crouched and inspected its edges. Not recently cleaned, he said aloud. There's dust on the outside, but inside it has been disturbed. Wren leaned down beside him. By the maid, no doubt. Poirot's brow furrowed. But look closer. The vent cover is misaligned. See the screw? It's not factory fitted. Someone removed it with a flat tool and hastily replaced it. The screw is worn unevenly. He stood, brushing his knees. May I speak to the maid again? Maddie nodded quickly. She's still in the kitchen, I think. I'll get her. A moment later, Elsie, the maid, entered the drawing room with hesitant steps. Her hands were clasped tightly before her apron. Poirot offered her a gentle look. You have worked here long. Only a year, sir, not more. I came after her last lady's companion left. Miss Maddie needed the help. You cleaned this room? Yes, sir. Every morning. Polished the piano. Dusted the curtains. Swept the rug. Miss Beatrice liked things exact. Did you ever touch the heater vent? No, sir. Not once. She didn't like it fussed with. Said the heat was temperamental. Poirot nodded slowly. You're certain? Quite. I only dusted the outer part with a cloth. Did Madame Worsley ever speak of anyone visiting her in the last week? Elsie hesitated. Only once. She had a man come to, bit shaggy. Said he was an old acquaintance. Brought a manuscript. Felix Comedy. Maddie interjected. The playwright? Elsie nodded. Yes, sir. That's the one. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the inspector. Wren frowned. We'll speak with him next. Elsie twisted her. He twisted her. apron. I don't think she liked him, sir. After he left, she muttered something under her breath about not forgetting what's been done. Poirot thanked her and dismissed her gently. Once she'd gone, he turned toward Wren and Maddie. She feared someone, Poirot said softly, and she knew what power she held. This note, this pose, the trace of Whodunit is not suicide, and it is not chance. It is the calculated silence of a woman prepared to destroy someone, or be destroyed in return. He turned toward Maddie once more. Mademoiselle, I must ask, you said you argued with your aunt last night. Did she threaten you? Maddie's lips tightened. She said I didn't deserve her legacy, that I would never live up to the name. She was cruel, always, and yet you stayed. She was family, Maddie said simply, and the only one I had left. Poirot looked away. The wind fluttered the curtains by the open window, carrying in a sharp breath of morning air. You said she always sat here, yes? He asked, pointing at the stool. Maddie nodded, without fail. And that she never adjusted the heater herself? No. She said it ruined her nails. Poirot's gaze settled once more on the vent. Then someone else set the stage, and they did so, knowing she would sit precisely there. He tapped the folded note in Wren's hand. She left a message, not for sympathy, but for clarity. The whisper she gave last night has frozen more than the room. It is not metaphor, Inspector. What is it, then? Wren asked. Poirot turned to the window once more. A warning, he said, and an echo of something much colder still. Chapter 3. The cold room. Felix Carmody arrived just past noon, wearing a herringbone coat a little too fine for village life, with a scarf wound haphazardly about his neck. His boots were scuffed, his eyes sunken and restless. I heard, he said as soon as he crossed the threshold, brushing snow from his shoulder, about Beatrice. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if it was sudden. He simply looked around the drawing room and then down at the piano. Still sits there, doesn't she? He murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Poirot watched him with unblinking calm. Monsieur Carmody, I thank you for coming so quickly. Felix nodded absently. Well, it's not as if I had anywhere else to be. Inspector Wren remained silent, arms folded near the fireplace. Maddie lingered by the doorway, her expression unreadable. Poirot gestured toward the chair beside the piano. May we speak plainly, monsieur? Felix dropped into the chair, not bothering to remove his coat. Plainly, yes. Why not? Poirot sat across from him, legs crossed, fingers steepled. You visited Madame Worsley the night before her death. I did. You brought her a manuscript. Yes. And what was her reaction to your gift? Felix let out a dry laugh. Oh, I didn't expect warmth. It was a symbolic gesture, really. She once told me I lacked originality, that I stole the very soul of my first play. I thought, perhaps after all these years she might say something kind, or at least decent. She did not. She looked me in the eye and said, I still have whispers left, Mr. Carmody. Be careful where your name appears next. Then she sipped her tea and asked me to leave. Poirot tilted his head. She threatened you. Felix gave a tired shrug. Is that what it was? With Beatrice, everything was a performance. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She whispered softly, just enough so the words got under your skin. Poirot studied him. And yet you came anyway. I needed to hear her say I was not a fraud. She didn't, of course. Couldn't let go of that moment all those years ago. Maddie stepped forward. You humiliated her back then too, didn't you? At that theatre gala. You called her a washed-up relic. Felix turned to her. She whispered into the host's ear, and by morning, every producer in London believed I'd stolen my entire act from a dying friend of hers in Milan. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Her voice killed me. Poirot looked thoughtful. He returned seeking vindication, but she refused. She said she'd write a letter to the festival board, saying she believed the original accusation after all, and that she was gathering further documentation. Poirot's brows lifted. Documentation? Felix scoffed. Probably nonsense. Or something she concocted to make me squirm. She knew how to threaten without lifting a finger. Poirot rose and paced once. Then, allow me to ask plainly, Monsieur, where were you last night, after you left Worsley Cottage? Felix met his gaze without flinching. At the pub, the King's Arms. I was seen by several people, including the barman. Poirot nodded once. We shall confirm it, of course. Felix leaned back. You think I did it, don't you? I do not think. Poirot said quietly. I consider. There is a difference. Wren broke in then, tone sharp. And what of the heat event, Mr. Carmody? You know anything about that? Felix frowned. What about it? We found it had been tampered with, likely used as a delivery method for poison. Felix blinked. Poison, cyanide, Poirot said. A scent lingered in the room this morning, Almonds. You were the last known visitor before she died. Felix swallowed hard. I'm not a chemist or a killer. I don't know the first thing about vents and vapors, and I didn't go back there last night. Poirot nodded once more. Then let us return to your manuscript. You left it behind. No, I took it with me. Poirot looked to Wren, who made a note. Very well, Monsieur Carmody. That is all for now. Felix stood, slower this time. I didn't do this, but I know what she was capable of. And if someone did kill her, I wouldn't be surprised. There are quieter ways of cutting throats, Monsieur Poirot. He left without another word. Poirot lingered in the room after Wren, and Maddie departed. He stepped again toward the heater vent. Kneeling, he ran his hand just above the metal, still faintly warm. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it gently against the grill. When he withdrew it, it showed a dull smudge-oily residue. He looked up sharply. Clever, he muttered, but not clever enough. He stood and approached the window, which remained open just a crack. He studied the frame and found a faint thumbprint smudged but unmistakably recent. The outer sill had the faintest line of dust displaced, as though something had rested there briefly, a canister, or perhaps an antique. Poirot's gaze swept the room again. His eyes narrowed on a cabinet in the corner, just beside the small writing desk. The doors were slightly ajar. Inside were several ornate perfume dispensers and atomizers arranged in a neat row. One space at the center was empty. Poirot pulled out a small flashlight from his coat and shone it on the back of the shelf. A faint residue glinted under the beam-fine mist-like particles. His fingers tapped thoughtfully on the wooden frame. "Someone used one of these," he murmured. "A timed diffuser. With precision. With purpose." He closed the cabinet slowly, glancing once more at the vent, the window, and finally the piano. Her habits were known, her routines predictable. Whoever killed Beatrice Worsley had counted on that, and counted on her not surviving long enough to whisper again. Chapter 4. Felix returns to the Senate was nearly dusk. When Felix Carmody returned, Inspector Wren had not summoned him, nor had Poirot. Yet there he was standing once more at the edge of the drawing-room, hat in hand, eyes lingering on the closed cabinet in the corner. "I needed to see it again," he said quietly. "The room. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept picturing her sitting there, still, like she might start humming again any second." Poirot, who had remained in the vicarage for most of the afternoon, now stepped forward. "You have come uninvited, monsieur. That interests me." Felix glanced at him. "So rest me, then. If that's what this is." Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the chair nearest the fire. "Sit, if your conscience has driven you here. Let us hear what it has to say." Felix sat heavily, the weight in his shoulders more visible than before. "I lied earlier." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "I said she only threatened me about the festival board that she'd write to them. That wasn't all. She said she kept a diary, a private one, full of secrets. That she wrote down every whisper she ever gave, and some she had yet to share." Poirot's expression darkened. "That is very different, monsieur." Felix leaned forward. "She said she'd written about me, that she'd make sure no one ever staged my work again. I was desperate, yes, but I didn't hurt her. I left that night, angry, humiliated, but alive." "Where is the diary now?" Poirot asked. Felix shook his head. "I don't know. I thought perhaps you'd found it already." "No, but you see," Poirot said softly. "Now I know to look for it." Felix stood again, restless. "I'm not the only one with secrets. Beatrice knew things about this village, about people you wouldn't suspect." Poirot said nothing. Felix stepped closer to the cabinet where the atomizers stood. "She showed me one of these once, said it was French, a limited design, could release scent at intervals." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Go on." "She was proud of it. Said it could be set to release even when she wasn't in the room. I asked her why she needed that kind of precision, and she just laughed and said, 'Sometimes perfume is more than fragrance.' Mr. Carmody, it's a message in the air." Poirot tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Then someone else knew as well," he said quietly. "Someone knew she used such a device. Someone who turned that message into a weapon. Wren, who had entered partway through the conversation, now spoke up. And you think someone tampered with it, replaced the scent with poison?" Felix turned. "I don't think. But if you're asking who might know the device, the vicar was often here. Heavenseed himself, fact himself a collector of foreign curiosities. They used to bicker about who owned what. Poirot's expression did not change, but a faint spark flickered behind his eyes. He nodded to himself. "Thank you, Monsieur Carmody," he said, stepping forward and gesturing to the door. "That will be all for now." Felix looked confused. "You're letting me go?" Poirot's tone was even. "You were never detained. But what you have said, it has opened another door." As Felix left, Poirot moved to the cabinet once more. He opened it with care, this time inspecting the base of each remaining perfume device. Beneath 1/3 from the right he found a faint fingerprint smudged in wax, a candle's wax. "Curious," he murmured. Wren approached. "What are you thinking now, Poirot?" "That the one who used this device did not pour the poison freshly. It was prepared in advance, perhaps sealed with wax to prevent premature dispersal, then inserted into the heating system with precision." He closed the cabinet and turned to Wren. "And the only one who would know both the device and her precise evening habit of sitting at the piano." Wren said it aloud. "Someone close to her." "Very close," Poirot nodded. "Someone with access to the room when she was absent. Someone she trusted or believed harmless." He walked toward the fireplace and stood silently for a moment. Then he asked, "Tell me, Inspector, did you question the Reverend closely?" Wren scoffed. "Chiswick? Not yet. He seemed harmless enough. Rattled, of course." Poirot turned, his expression sharp now. "Then I suggest we speak with him. Immediately." 10 minutes later, they stood at the VICARAGE. Reverend Eldon Chiswick opened the door himself. He wore his cassock, though his collar was undone and his fingers stained faintly with ink. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "has something new come?" "Too light." Poirot stepped forward. "We hope you might assist us further." "Of course." The vicar led them into a modest sitting room. A pot of tea sat cooling on the table beside the Hindles. Poirot went straight to the point. "Reverend, you were close to Madame Worsley." Chiswick hesitated. "I have known her many years." "You visited her recently?" "Yes, only briefly. I brought over a new hymn to review." Poirot's brow furrowed. "That hymn, may I see it?" Chiswick moved to a side table and retrieved a folded paper. Poirot accepted it, opened it, and noted the date. "A week old," he said quietly. "You brought it 2 nights ago, you said." Chiswick shifted slightly. "Perhaps I misspoke. I'd meant to bring it that night, but I forgot." Poirot's gaze fixed on the vicar's hands, clean now, but ink-stained. "A habit, or something recently wiped." "Clean. We found wax residue in the drawing room," Poirot said, watching his reaction. "Unusual wax. The sort used to seal antique containers." Chiswick blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "Did you ever see Madame Worsley use a perfume diffuser near the heater?" Chiswick hesitated only for a moment. "Yes," he said. "She had 1 or 2, but she kept them for display." Poirot's voice grew quiet. "And you never touched them? Never helped her refill one, or borrow one for your own collection?" Chiswick smiled faintly, the lines around his mouth stiff. "Certainly not." Poirot nodded slowly. "Of course." He stepped back, but the look in his eyes had sharpened once again. Chapter 5. A Vicar's Quiet Terror You Noticed It Too. Then, Wren asked, his boots crunching on the gravel path as they left the vicarage. The sky had turned to a pale bruise, the sun already dying behind the bare hedgerows. Poirot adjusted his gloves. The moment I mentioned the perfume diffuser, his voice faltered, only slightly, but it was there. Wren grunted. Maybe he's nervous because he's grieving. Poirot stopped. He said the diffuser was for display, but Mademoiselle Maddie described her aunt using it nightly, and Monsieur Carmody remembered her speaking of it years ago. Why would the vicar, a frequent visitor, not know its use? Wren exhaled through his nose. You think he tampered with it, I think, Poirot said slowly. He lied about something very small, and one only lies about small things when the large ones are impossible to defend. They walked in silence back to Worsley Cottage. The constable had already returned the scene to quiet order. The piano was covered now, the body long removed, but the cold in the drawing-room lingered, as if memory had seeped into the furniture. Maddie was waiting. She stood by the fire, arms folded, her face unreadable. Did you find anything? She asked. Poirot offered a half-bow. We spoke to the Reverend. He offered some clarity, but questions remain. Maddie didn't reply. She stared instead at the empty space where her aunt's stool once stood. Poirot approached her. Gently. Tell me, mademoiselle, did your aunt ever speak of a diary, something she kept hidden? Maddie nodded slowly. Yes. She called it her ledger, said it wasn't just a journal, it was her arsenal. She told me once that everything worth remembering was written there. Poirot's brow lifted. And did she keep it here? She never let me see it. But I think she kept it in the music cabinet. Poirot turned at once to the large black-lacquered cabinet near the window. It held sheet music, mostly in old, leather-bound folders. Beneath them, tucked tightly into the rear, was a thin, ribbon-bound notebook, worn, yet meticulously preserved. Poirot opened it. Inside, the first page read in spidery ink. Whispers are made not to be spoken, but to be stored, in case they must be released. He flipped carefully through the pages. Names, events, notes, even dates and times. Felix Carmody, the 7th of March 1927, claimed author of Drowned Light. But I heard it first. From Isabelle Renard, Paris, May 1925. Reverend Chiswick, the 2nd of September 1931, asked about scent dispensers, said he admired their design, returned 2 months later with a replica, would not say where he got it. Madeline Gray, the 15th of June, 1934, lied about where she was that night. I followed. She was not at the cinema. She was at Dr. Caven's house. Poirot's eyes lingered. You see, he murmured, this is no idle diary. It is a collection of leverage. Maddie looked pale. She kept records on everyone. She called it her arsenal. Poirot reminded her, and I believe she meant to deploy one final whisper. He closed the ledger gently. She knew someone had betrayed her, or would. Perhaps that whisper came too late. Wren stepped closer. That entry about the vicar, the scent dispenser, he did no more than he claimed. Poirot nodded. Indeed, he admired her collection, even borrowed one. He returned it, she says, but did he make a replica? A duplicate, a switch, Wren muttered. That would explain how the device was swapped without anyone noticing. Poirot's expression darkened, and it would explain the wax. If he sealed something inside an agent activated by heat, the timing had to be precise. Maddie sank into a chair. But why would the vicar kill her? She supported his church, defended him. Poirot looked at her gently. Sometimes gratitude is not enough. Sometimes fear makes men act irrationally. He turned again to the ledger. Perhaps she had written something more about him, something damning. He flipped again. One entry. Near the back caught his eye. Chiswick. The 12th of November 1939. I found the letter from Constance to his brother. It proves the funds were taken, quietly, but taken. If the board knew. Poirot read it aloud. Wren swore under his breath. Misappropriation of parish funds? Poirot nodded slowly. If Madame Worsley had chosen to whisper that to the bishop's secretary, he'd be finished, Wren said. And she'd whispered plenty in the past, Maddie said faintly. Poirot turned to her. So he acted, perhaps when she invited him for a brief visit. He excused himself to warn the room something he'd done before. He switches the device. The poison is released later. Silent, scented. He folded the ledger and tucked it under his arm. But one thing remains. Maddie looked up. She left the note, the one in her hand. How did she know? Poirot asked. How did she know she was dying? Maddie frowned. You think she realized by the smell, perhaps, the bitter almond, a faint dizziness, or the sudden silence. She must have felt it. And in that final moment, she clutched a warning. Wren moved to the window and opened it wider. Cold air gusted in. Then we have motive. We have means. Poirot nodded once. We must now have confrontation. Chapter 6. The final whisper. Morning arrived shrouded in frost. Reverend Eldon. Chiswick stepped through the door of Worsley Cottage with a faintly drawn face, and hands clasped behind his back, as though in mourning or self-containment. The collar of his coat was turned up, his breath misting in the cold air. I was told you've made discoveries, he said gently as Inspector Wren ushered him into the drawing room. Is this about the heating vent? Poirot was already there, standing near the piano, a slender notebook in hand. Monsieur le Vicaire, Poirot said with quiet formality. Thank you for coming. I do what I can, Chiswick replied, though I must say I'm still shaken. Beatrice's death. She was such a force in this village. Poirot nodded once. Indeed, a force of keen memory and unspoken truths. He stepped forward and held up the notebook. This, monsieur, is her ledger. You know of it? Chiswick's eyes faltered for the briefest second. I've heard mention. She was meticulous. Poirot opened it to the marked page. On the 12th of November last year, she wrote of finding a letter from Constance to your brother, regarding funds withdrawn discreetly. The vicar's posture stiffened. That's a private matter. And yet, Poirot continued, to Madame Worsley, it was ammunition. Perhaps she told you she had it. Perhaps she even showed it to you. She would not, but she would, Poirot said firmly. She would whisper it just so. Monsieur Chiswick, whisper it, as she did to so many others, with that infuriating calm that left one helpless and afraid. Wren watched closely now, arms folded. The vicar's voice was barely audible. It wasn't embezzlement. It was a loan. My brother was ill. I paid it back. Poirot's tone remained measured, but the letter said nothing of repayment, and if revealed, the consequences would be severe. You knew that. Chiswick turned away, his hands tightening behind his back. You had access, Poirot continued. You were often in her home. You admired the scent dispensers, according to her own record. You once returned 1 month after borrowing it yet. In that time, a replica might have been created. The vicar said nothing. 2 nights ago, Poirot pressed gently. Did she summon you? Did she say she intended to send the letter? Chiswick turned slowly. His voice, when it came, was low and frayed. She told me she had already mailed it. Wren's head lifted. She said it would reach the bishop by Friday. That there was nothing I could do. That all she needed to do now was wait and play her final note. She said it with such quiet cruelty. Poirot said softly, "And so you acted." Chiswick's face flushed. "I didn't poison her." "No." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Then how did the diffuser come to be filled with vapor laced with cyanide, sealed with wax, inserted near the vent where she always sat?" The vicar looked down. "I only meant to frighten her. I had no poison. Only the scent of bitter almonds, a harmless perfume. She once told me it unsettled her." Poirot stepped forward. "You lie again, monsieur. There is residue. Enough to test. Enough to confirm." Chiswick's shoulders dropped. His eyes no longer met Poirot's. "I didn't know how much would be. Too much." He whispered. There was silence. Poirot spoke with grave clarity. "You intended to silence the whisper, but she left one more behind." He held up the folded note found in her hand. "The whisper she gave last night has frozen more than the room." Wren stepped forward, voice cold. "Reverend Eldon Chiswick, I'll need you to come with me." Chiswick did not resist. As the constable appeared, he straightened his coat and followed without a word. When the door shut behind them, Poirot remained in the drawing-room, eyes lingering on the piano stool. Maddie entered moments later, her expression unreadable. "So it was him?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, a man driven not by malice, but desperation. She left him no escape. She did that." Maddie said, "To all of us." Poirot turned to her. "Did she ever whisper to you?" Maddie hesitated. "Often, but I stopped listening." He raised a brow. "I knew her power came from the secrets she collected, but I never thought someone would kill her for it." Poirot said gently, "And yet, it was never the secrets alone, it was the manner of their telling. The moment, the tone, the control. She controlled everyone," Maddie said. Poirot nodded once. "Until the very end." She looked at him. "What happens now?" He held up the ledger. "The diary will be turned over to the authorities. Most entries may mean nothing. Some may destroy reputations. That is for the law to decide." Maddie stepped toward the window and opened it wider. The cold breeze entered, chasing the last remnants of the perfume. Poirot turned to go. Before he reached the door, Maddie spoke again. I think she knew, she said. Poirot paused. That night. I think she knew it would happen. She wrote the note after our argument. She said something strange as I was leaving. She said, some whispers have waited years. Tomorrow, I let one out, and someone won't survive it. Poirot's expression softened. And she was right. He bowed his head slightly. Goodbye, Mademoiselle Grey. She gave no answer, only stood at the window as the cold filled the room once more. Chapter 7. The letter that was never sent while days had passed since Reverend Chiswick was taken into custody. Snow clung to the hedgerows in damp, sagging heaps, and the village moved with the hush that follows scandal. Church bells rang only once, and the path to the bishop's residence remained conspicuously empty. Poirot, however, was not yet content. He returned to Worsley Cottage that morning with a specific task in mind. Maddie answered the door, robe still, clutched about her. I wasn't expecting you, she said, voice low. Poirot removed his hat. Forgive the intrusion, mademoiselle, but there is one final thread I must pull. She stepped aside to let him in. The drawing room had been left untouched. The dust on the piano's lid was faint, but it had begun to gather. Poirot walked straight to the small writing desk near the window, the one her aunt had used for letters and receipts. I am searching for a particular letter, he said. One your aunt claimed she had already posted to the bishop's office, exposing Chiswick's misdeeds. Maddie frowned. She told him it was sent. Poirot nodded. But I am not convinced it ever was. He opened the drawers carefully. Inside were half-used packets of stationery, a silver letter opener to wax seals, and a small bundle of envelopes. Some were blank, others bore addresses. He checked each with a gloved hand. Then he found it at the very back of the drawer, tucked between unused parchment, was a single envelope. It was addressed to the office of the bishop, Diocese of North Wickham. The seal was intact and unbroken. Poirot held it delicately and turned it over. She never sent it, he said softly. She let Chiswick believe it had gone, but she kept it here. Perhaps she intended to send it the next day, or perhaps she only wished to watch him squirm. Maddie stepped forward, peering at it. Do you think she meant to ruin him? Completely. She wanted him to suffer. Yes, Poirot replied. But I believe she also wanted to feel safe. And in her own way, this was power. Power delayed. She controlled the moment of its release. He placed the letter on the desk and sighed. Wren arrived. Not long after, coat dusted with snow. Still poking about? He asked with a gruff smile. Poirot nodded. I have found something. The final whisper. Or perhaps the one that never truly came. He gestured to the letter. Wren read the front, then raised his eyebrows. Not posted, no. He looked up, so Chiswick acted on a lie. Poirot's tone turned grave. Yes, she manipulated him one last time, and he responded with desperation. Maddie said softly, she knew exactly how far to push. Poirot gave a slight nod. It is an irony. If she had truly sent it, perhaps he would have remained still, accepted what came. But it was the uncertainty, the threat of exposure that drove him to act. Wren picked up the envelope. I'll have this logged. It may serve in court. Poirot stood, brushing down his cuffs, and it brings a question to mind, Inspector. Not about the case, but about justice. Wren blinked. How do you mean? Poirot glanced at Maddie, then back to Wren. If Beatrice Worsley had posted this letter, Chiswick's downfall would have been public and complete. But her death, though tragic, has allowed us to catch him for something far worse. Wren understood. You're wondering which outcome she would have preferred. Poirot's voice was quiet, perhaps. In the end, she got what she truly wanted, the silence of the room, the power to destroy, without ever having to speak. Later that day, Poirot visited the local post office. The clerk, a short, neat woman with spectacles on a chain, greeted him with a curious smile. "You're the Belgian gentleman," she said. The detective. Poirot inclined his head. "I have a small query," he said. "Did Madame Beatrice Worsley post anything the night before she died?" "A letter to North Wickham." The clerk pursed her lips and thought. "No," she said. "She came by around tea time, as she often did, asked for stamps but didn't hand anything over. Said she'd post something in the morning." Poirot thanked her and stepped back out into the street, snow falling lightly against his coat. So she never meant to send it. He had his answer. That evening, as the cottage lights dimmed and silence settled once more over the village, Maddie found herself seated at the piano. She did not play, but she opened the music cabinet and took out a faded sheet titled Nocturne in C minor, one of her aunt's favorites. She placed it before her and then, quietly, without striking a single note, she spoke aloud. She wasn't kind, she wasn't fair, but she was brilliant. Poirot, seated near the hearth, said nothing. Maddie turned to him. "You knew from the start, didn't you, that this wasn't just murder? That it was something slower?" Poirot folded his hands. "It was power, mademoiselle, power drawn, like a bowstring over decades." And released in a whisper, he stood and approached the door. "One last thing," he said, pausing with his hand on the latch. "There was an entry in the ledger about you." Maddie stiffened. She wrote of a lie about where you were on the 15th of June, visiting a Dr. Cavan. She looked at him, then away. She thought it a betrayal. Poirot continued. "But perhaps it was simply privacy." Maddie said nothing. Poirot nodded, understanding. "Then I shall leave it unspoken. Some whispers," he said gently, "need not be heard." And he stepped out into the night. Chapter 8. A visitor in mourning next morning broke with hesitant light. The village, still cloaked in mist, stirred to the sound of birdsong muffled by frost. At Worsley Cottage, Maddie had just begun to prepare a pot of tea when a knock echoed from the front door. It was not forceful, but deliberate, 3 gentle raps. As if the caller were unsure whether they should be there at all. She opened it to find Dr. Lionel Braithwaite, Beatrice's former physician, standing on the threshold. He held his hat against his chest and gave a polite nod. "Maddie," he said softly, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Doctor," she replied, surprised. "Do come in." He entered hesitantly, pausing in the hallway to look around, as though half expecting to see Beatrice descending the stairs. "I only heard about her death, Yesterday, he said. I'd been away in Shrewsbury. Just returned this morning. I saw the news in the post office. Maddie motioned to the drawing room. Please, sit down. Braithwaite lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa, his posture as careful as his speech. I'd attended to Beatrice for over 20 years, he said quietly. She was not an easy woman, but she was rarely unwell. I was surprised to hear it was sudden. Maddie nodded, pouring the tea. It wasn't natural. He looked up sharply. You mean she was murdered, Doctor? Poisoned? Braithwaite's face darkened with shock, but not disbelief. I suppose. I shouldn't be surprised. There was always something theatrical in the way she lived. Poirot entered then, having been informed earlier of the doctor's unexpected visit. He removed his gloves and stepped into the room, greeting the physician with a slight bow. Dr. Braithwaite, he said, I wonder if you might allow me a few questions. Of course, Braithwaite said, though unease crept into his voice. Poirot sat opposite him, legs crossed. You had not seen Madame Worsley for some time? Not in recent weeks. No. I last called on her about a month ago. Routine matters, blood pressure, minor complaints. Did she ever request medication? Something unusual. Braithwaite hesitated. She asked about sleeping draughts once, a year ago. But I refused. She didn't need them, and she had a strong constitution. Too strong for such things. Poirot nodded. And was she in the habit of keeping any medications or chemicals in the house? Not that I ever saw. Have you heard of ethyl cyanide vapor? Poirot asked, his tone precise. Braithwaite frowned. Cyanide, of course, but vapor. Form, that's not something a civilian would easily come across. It's used in industrial fumigation rare, but terribly dangerous. Certainly fatal in confined spaces. Poirot tapped his fingers together. And not something one would find in a country vicar's belongings. Braithwaite blinked. A vicar? Poirot said gently, Reverend Chiswick has confessed. He engineered a means to release a toxic vapor through a modified scent diffuser. It mimicked her perfume. She sat in her usual place. The heater carried the poison, and she never moved again. Braithwaite let out a long breath. My God. Maddie was silent, her hands cupped around the teacup. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did she ever express fear to you, Doctor, or anxiety? Braithwaite paused. Not openly, but the last time I saw her, she mentioned something strange. She said, I wonder who'll come for me first. The cold or the whisper. I thought she was being poetic. Poirot exchanged a glance with Maddie. It was not poetry. He said, it was prophecy. After the doctor had left, Maddie remained, seated, her eyes fixed on the teacup in her hands. She said that to him, she murmured. The same phrase she used the night before. Poirot nodded. The whisper became her symbol, a means of control, but also, in the end, a recognition of the danger she had created. Maddie stood and walked to the piano. Opening the lid, she did not play, but stared down at the ivory keys. I keep thinking about the day she asked me to move in, she said softly. She said it wasn't for company, but so she'd have someone to hear, someone who could witness. Should something happen, Poirot moved to stand beside her. She knew, he said. She knew the web she spun could one day snap back. Maddie looked at him. "You've solved it," the vicar confessed. "The evidence is clear. So why does it still feel unfinished?" Poirot considered this. "Because," he said gently, "there is more to murder than motive and means. There is aftermath. There is memory." He turned to the window. "And there is legacy." That afternoon, Poirot returned briefly to the parish office. The local curate, young, overwhelmed, had been left to manage Chiswick's absence. "Reverend Chiswick's private study?" Poirot asked politely. "Upstairs," the curate said. "Do you need me to accompany you?" "No, monsieur," Poirot said with a faint smile. "I know what I'm looking for." He climbed the narrow staircase to a modest room filled with theological books, ink pots, and a solitary writing desk. There, in the top drawer, he found what he suspected: a second perfume diffuser, identical in design to the one in Beatrice's cabinet, only this one bore a small brass tag. "Property of Beatrice Worsley minus 1936. The vicar had not returned it, as her diary claimed. He had kept it all this time. Poirot turned it over carefully. Inside, a trace of the waxy seal still clung to the nozzle. "We," he murmured. "The weapon was built long before the crime. It only waited for the whisper." Chapter 9. The curtain-called village hall was quiet that evening. Too quiet for a place once filled with orchestras, whispered gossip, and Beatrice Worsley's carefully curated performances. Maddie stood just inside the heavy wooden doors, staring up at the velvet curtains drawn across the small stage. It had been Beatrice's second home, her theatre of whispers, and for Maddie, it now felt like the ghost of something unfinished. Poirot entered beside her, gloves neatly folded in one hand. "She performed here often?" he asked gently. Maddie gave a small nod. "Every December. Holiday recitals, monologues, old arias no one remembered. She made them unforgettable." Poirot's gaze swept the room, and she controlled the audience with silence as much as sound. "Nom?" She liked the hush before applause more than the applause itself, Maddie said, her voice hollow. It made her feel necessary. Poirot turned to face her fully. "You feel her absence here?" Maddie hesitated, then said, "No, I feel her presence here more than anywhere else." She stepped forward, walking slowly up the 3 creaking steps onto the stage. Poirot followed, hands behind his back. "I found something yesterday," Maddie said suddenly, "in a drawer backstage. It was addressed to me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "May I see it?" She produced the letter from her coat pocket, unfolding it carefully. The paper bore Beatrice's unmistakable looping hand. "Dearest Maddie, when I no longer have breath to speak, I hope you'll find this and understand what I could not say aloud. I never wished to make you small, only strong. But strong people do not always bloom under shade. I know what you did in June. I do not blame you. You must live your life, not mine. But I hope you'll remember truth is like perfume. Beautiful, dangerous, and lingering long after we think it's gone. Yours, B***. Maddie folded it again, slowly. Poirot remained silent. She knew, Maddie said, about Dr. Cavan. That I visited him about. Something personal. Poirot gave a soft nod. She made a note in her ledger, but she chose not to use it, not as a weapon. She used everything else, Maddie said. Why spare me? Poirot walked to the edge of the stage and looked out at the empty seats. Perhaps because she knew you would stay, not for obligation, but for memory. Maddie let the silence settle again. She said truth is like perfume, she repeated. Is that why she died? Because she released too much. Poirot's voice was low. No, mademoiselle. She died because someone feared the scent would reach too far. She cultivated power for decades and, in doing so, became a prisoner of it. Maddie sat on the piano bench at stage left, just beneath a small gaslight still faintly humming. You said there's legacy, she murmured. What's hers? Poirot turned to her, his voice calm but firm. She taught a village to listen. She whispered, and they trembled. That is power. Yes, but it is also burden, your legacy. Mademoiselle Grey need not be the same. Maddie looked up. Then what should it be? Perhaps, Poirot said with a faint smile, to whisper less and sing more. The next morning, Poirot packed his case in the quiet vicarage guest room. His journey would take him back to London by midday, and already the sun had begun to pierce the frost on the stone windowsill. Inspector Wren arrived before departure, hat tucked under one arm. You were right, he said. The second diffuser matched the model found in Beatrice's house. Forensics confirmed traces of ethyl cyanide and sealing wax. Poirot looked up. Then the chain is complete. Chiswick still hasn't spoken much since the arrest, Wren added. But with the weapon, the motive, and the ledger, the Crown has more than enough. Poirot nodded. It is no longer a mystery, it is a matter of justice. Wren paused. There's one thing I keep thinking about. Yes, that note in her hand. The one she clutched when she died. It said, the last whisper, tell Maddie. Poirot smiled faintly. And we have told her. Wren looked puzzled. But what did she mean? Poirot picked up his valise and answered gently. It was not a message about the crime. It was about truth, about the only person in the room she hoped would still carry it forward. He stepped past Wren, stopping only once at the door. She could have whispered Maddie's secret to the world, but instead, she whispered Maddie's name to death. That evening, Maddie returned to the village hall alone. No crowds, no notes. She pulled open the curtains herself, lit two gas lamps, and stepped onto the stage in silence. She sat at the piano and laid out Nocturne in C minor. But this time, she played it. Every note filled the space like breath. And when she reached the final chord, she did not rise. She let it fade slowly, as if it might carry a whisper of Beatrice with it. And when the silence came, it was hers. Chapter 10, The Diaries. Final page of morning after the recital. Maddie sat once again by the fireplace in Worsley Cottage, the diary resting in her lap. She had kept it closed since Poirot left, unable or perhaps unwilling to face its final entries. But now, with the last performance played, and the village falling slowly back into its quiet rhythm, something urged her to look. She undid the ribbon slowly, almost reverently. The first pages she had already seen. Notes on Felix. Comedy, Reverend Chiswick. even one or two ambiguous lines about herself. But it was the final page she'd never dared to read, the very last whisper. And now, it stared up at her. Entry -9 February. Maddie watches me like I'm a stranger. Some days, I think she wants to understand, but I'm not built for transparency. I taught her music, yes, but I think I also taught her silence, not the useful kind. I keep writing in this book, thinking someday someone will use it, that someone will know what to do with all my carefully held truths. But even I don't know what they mean anymore. The vicar suspects I know. I let him suspect. Perhaps that's cruel. Or perhaps I need him to know that someone sees. I am tired of watching, tired of waiting. If I were to vanish tomorrow, who would open this book and feel anything but wait? Maddie, if you're reading this, burn it. Don't let the ledger become your cage. The truth is only worth as much as the love behind it. Maddie sat back, the final sentence ringing in her ears. The truth is only worth as much as the love behind it. She folded the diary shut and stared into the fire. The flames danced low, inviting. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, with deliberate care, she stood at the far end of the garden, just beyond the rose bushes now brittle with winter. Maddie placed the diary into the rusted incinerator bin. She struck a match and held it to the edge of the ribbon. The fire took slowly, creeping through the pages like a cautious reader. And then, with a low sigh, it consumed. She watched the smoke twist upward, grey against the white sky, and for the first time in days, she let herself breathe deeply. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Felix Carmody. I saw the smoke, he said, and I thought surely she wouldn't burn sheet music. Maddie offered a small smile. Just something Beatrice left behind. Felix hesitated, then stepped closer. She wrote about me, didn't she, in that thing of hers? Maddie nodded. She thought you stole a melody years ago. He laughed. Softly. I didn't. I heard it, yes, but I never used it. I knew it was hers. She never believed that. No, he agreed. But then, she never really believed anyone could change. That's why she kept all those notes to keep people fixed, pinned like butterflies. Maddie looked at him, surprised by the insight. Felix met her gaze. I loved her once, you know, or at least the version of her I thought existed. She didn't reply. There was nothing to add. He turned to go, but paused. I'm glad you burned it, he said. She built that thing like a fortress. Maybe now someone can build something else. Then he left, his boots crunching softly along the garden path. Later that day, Maddie visited Poirot at the small inn where he had remained a few nights longer than expected. He greeted her with warmth, as though he had known she would come. You have done something brave today, he said, offering her tea. You burned the ledger. She nodded. She asked me to. In the end, Poirot's eyes lit faintly with approval. Then she knew. She understood. She feared it would become a cage, Maddie said. Poirot sipped. It already had, for her, and for all those she wrote about. Secrets are not truths, they are debts. And Beatrice lived on borrowed trust. Maddie leaned forward slightly. There's one thing that still bothers me. Poirot gestured for her to continue. That phrase she used over and over again, the last whisper. Do you think it was always about Chiswick, or was there something else? Poirot's gaze became distant for a moment. I believe it was about letting go. He said, she built her life around the unsaid. The final whisper was the one she chose not to give. Maddie nodded slowly. Then maybe she found peace. Poirot smiled faintly. Perhaps. Or perhaps she passed the burden to you, trusting you to release it differently. She looked down at her hands. Do you believe people like her can be forgiven? Poirot's voice was very quiet. Forgiveness is not about the past, mademoiselle. It is about choosing what you carry forward. Maddie stood. Then I choose music, she said. Poirot rose and bowed slightly, a beautiful choice. The only kind of whisper that lingers without harm. Chapter 11. The Shadow Beside the Frith. Next few days passed in a hush, broken only by the distant tolling of church bells and the occasional scrape of snow being cleared from cottage steps. Worsley Cottage stood quieter than ever, though no longer heavy with secrets. Maddie went about her days with fewer pauses, fewer shadows behind her eyes. But one remained, a single unresolved whisper, not about Beatrice, but about the man who had ended her, Reverend Eldon Chiswick. Though the village had resumed its rhythm, a certain unease still clung to the chapel pews, like a hen with one note off key. And so, on a cold Thursday morning, Maddie found herself walking not to the village hall, nor to the piano, but to the small local jail where Chiswick was being held before transfer. She hadn't told Poirot. She hadn't even told herself, really. But something needed saying. The constable, a kind-faced man with ruddy cheeks, led her to the interview room without questions. You'll have 10 minutes, miss, he said gently. He's been quiet. Maddie stepped inside. Chiswick sat alone, hands folded, posture straight. His collar had been removed, and his face looked older than she remembered, creased not by guilt, but by resignation. He looked up slowly as she entered. Maddie Gray, he said, as though stating a line from a sermon. I was wondering if you'd come. She took the chair opposite him. I'm not here for answers, she said. He inclined his head. That's good. I haven't got any. A pause. The room ticked quietly with the sound of an old wall clock. You were always kind to me, he said suddenly. When you first came to the village, you brought me a fruitcake for Christmas. I remember that. I thought it was what people did. It was, he said, what people used to do. She folded her arms. Why did you keep the diffuser for so long? Chiswick sighed. Because I couldn't let go of what she made me feel. The shame, the fear. She held power even when silent, and part of me, ashamed as it sounds, wanted her to feel it back. You could have walked away. I did, many times. He looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes were hollow. But it's hard to walk away from someone who knows something you've hidden your whole life. He leaned back, closing his eyes. She told me that she had sealed the letter, that it would reach the bishop by week's end. I asked her to reconsider. She said nothing, only played one of her old pieces, like I wasn't there, like I didn't exist. just a pause between notes. Maddie swallowed, her throat dry. "And that's when you decided." "I decided long before," he said, "but I hadn't acted. Not until I saw her that night, sitting there with that calm smile, ready to ruin what was left of me." He opened his eyes again, fixed them on her. "And yet she never sent it, did she?" "No," Maddie said softly. "She kept it." Chiswick gave a pained smile. "Then she won, even in death." "No," Maddie replied. "She didn't." After leaving the station, Maddie walked without thinking, boots crunching lightly along the half-frozen path toward the inn. She found Poirot in the reading room, seated by a small fire, a book open on his knee, but unread. He glanced up. "You saw him?" She nodded, removing her gloves. "I don't know what I expected." Poirot closed the book. There is a tendency, after a mystery is solved, to believe that peace returns at once. But it doesn't. No, he smiled, gently. Peace is not the end of noise, it is the acceptance of silence. Maddie sank into the chair beside the fire. "I think he loved her," she said. In a way twisted by resentment and fear, Poirot gave a small nod. "That is not uncommon. To hate someone is often to have once loved them too deeply." She played him like a note. Maddie whispered, "And when he broke, it surprised no one." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling quietly beside them. Then Poirot turned, his tone light but deliberate. "There was one entry in the diary I never asked you about." Maddie looked at him. It referenced a conversation. He said, "Between you and Beatrice regarding a stage curtain." Maddie nodded slowly. "It was 2 months ago. She said she wanted to make one final appearance, one that no one would forget." She used the word curtain deliberately. "Yes." Poirot leaned forward. "Then she staged her death. In some way, not the act itself, but the moment, the way it was delivered." Maddie nodded again. "She chose the diffuser. She chose where to sit. She knew." Poirot closed his eyes. "Then it was not only a murder, it was a performance." That evening, Maddie lit a candle by the piano outside. The wind had risen again, and the cottage creaked softly with its breath. She opened her music journal, not Beatrice's, but her own, and began to write. The piece had no name, just a motif, a soft melody that rose and fell like snowfall dot, and at its center, a pause, not silence, not absence, but breath, a moment between whispers. Chapter 12. A note in the snowed snow had returned overnight, not thick, but persistent. It carpeted the village with a soft hush, covering rooftops and hedges alike, as though the world had pressed its finger to its lips once more. Maddie stood by the cottage window, tea cooling in her hand, watching the flakes dance down in hesitant spirals. The day before, she'd spoken to a murderer. The day before that, she'd burned her aunt's secrets. And now, the village seemed to wait again. She turned to the piano, meaning to return to her composition, but a flicker of movement at the gate caught her eye. A figure in grey, older, slender. She recognized him instantly. Dr. Lionel Braithwaite, Beatrice's physician. Maddie set the cup aside and went to the door. He stood in the snow, gloved hands holding a small envelope. his mustache rimmed faintly with frost. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, voice clipped with cold. "Of course not. Please come in." But he shook his head. "I won't stay. I only came to give you this." He extended the envelope, stiff and yellowed slightly at the edges. "I found it behind my desk this morning. I don't know how long it's been there. It's addressed to Beatrice, but it's not in her hand." Maddie took it, turning it over. There was no postmark, no stamp, only a name written in careful, trembling script. "Beatrice Worsley. It's not yours?" she asked. "No, but I believe I know whose it is." She looked up. Braithwaite gave a slow nod. "Carmody. Felix Carmody." Poirot arrived shortly after midday, having received Maddie's call. She handed him the letter in silence. He opened it carefully, laying the single sheet of folded paper across the table. The handwriting was unsteady but legible, formal in tone, yet with an undercurrent of regret. "Dear Beatrice, I have avoided this for too long. You once told me that silence can be a kindness, but I have come to believe that it is also a form of cowardice. What I did in 1937, taking your work, your theme, and presenting it as my own, was not a mistake of memory. It was theft, and I have carried it in my chest like a second heartbeat ever since. You never said a word to me directly, but I knew you knew. The way you looked at me over your glasses, beneath that furrowed brow, you made me feel 10 inches tall. I am sorry, Beatrice, truly, not for the theft, but for the friendship I ruined because of it. If you choose to forgive me, I will be in the audience of your recital next week. If not, I will stay away." Felix Poirot folded the letter gently and looked up at Maddie. She never opened it. Maddie nodded. Or perhaps she did and resealed it. She had a wax set. She could have done it for effect. She may have wished to appear ignorant. That was her way. Nom? Maddie moved to the fireplace, arms folded. He was there that night, at the recital, so she must have accepted it. Silently, Poirot stood and crossed to her. The theft was old, and yet it lingered, not because of the music, but because of what was left unspoken. She forgave him with a silence, Maddie murmured. "The same silence that destroyed Chiswick." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "but silence is not a tool. It is a reflection. When used by love, it soothes. When used by fear, it corrodes." She turned back to him. "So what was Beatrice using it for in the end?" Poirot paused. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But she allowed those around her to define the silence for themselves, and in doing so, they revealed who they truly were. That afternoon, Maddie paid a visit to Felix Carmody's cottage. It was tucked behind the old smithy, smoke curling from the chimney. He opened the door with a faint look of surprise. "Maddie, come in." She stepped inside, past the scattered stacks of music books and loose sheets. Without preamble, she held out the letter. He took it slowly. "I wrote this years ago," he said. "I never knew if she read it." "She did," Maddie said. "And she didn't." Felix looked puzzled. "She kept it," she explained. "Unopened door resealed. Either way, she allowed you to come that night." That was her answer. He read the letter again, and when he folded it, his hands trembled faintly. "I don't know if I deserved her forgiveness." "You didn't," Maddie said plainly, "but she gave it anyway." Silently, Felix smiled bitterly. She always did know how to make a point. Maddie stepped toward the door. "Maybe it's time you write something new." He looked at her. "For her," she said, as dusk drew near. Maddie returned home and lit a small lamp by the piano. A new sheet of staff paper sat waiting. She took a deep breath. Then, slowly, she began to transcribe the melody she had carried. With her since the recital, only now, she added something new. A second voice, Felix's theme. The one he had taken long ago, but this time altered. Woven through hers, no longer dominant, no longer stolen, just shared, for once. The silence between them became harmony. Chapter 13. The last piece on the stand. 3 weeks had passed since the snow began to retreat, and Worsley Cottage no longer seemed to echo with absence. It breathed instead, with paper and piano and new purpose. Maddie sat at the piano with a sharpened pencil tucked behind her ear, and the lamp burning low beside her. She had filled 8 pages of composition, now an interweaving of her theme, and the echo of Felix's old refrain, not as rivals, but in harmony. The piece was almost done. Almost. But there was something missing, a final movement, something not composed, but felt. She stared at the last staff line, empty. Then, as if in answer, the door knocked one slight, precise. Poirot. She let him in without a word, and he removed his gloves with quiet ceremony. "I was passing through." "Again," he said with a faint smile, "and I thought, before I returned to London, I would like to see the final notes." Maddie gestured to the table. "Not quite finished." "Ah," he said, stepping closer. "The last piece always lingers, like the final page of a diary hardest to close." She watched as his eyes scanned the bars of notation. He made no comments, just read, absorbing every curve and slur and breath mark. Then, without looking up, he said, "Have you returned to the church?" She hesitated. "No, it remains closed," he said, gently. "The curate holds morning prayers, but the villagers do not gather. The echo of Reverend Chiswick still lingers." "I think it always will," Maddie replied. Poirot tapped the edge of the sheet with one finger. "And yet, the village breathes. Music returns. Time continues." She gave a nod, slow but steady. "Because of closure?" "No," he said. "Because of choice. You chose to write. Felix chose to confess. Even Beatrice, she chose, in the end, to let go." Maddie moved to the mantel, where a single photo of her aunt still stood. Beatrice in her 30s, seated beside a grand piano, eyes stern, fingers elegant. "I wonder if she would have liked the piece," Maddie said. Poirot stepped beside her. "She would have pretended not to, but in private she would have played it again. Twice." Maddie laughed softly. Poirot turned to her, his tone now quieter. "I must ask you one final thing." She looked at him, curious. Did Beatrice ever speak of a performance, an unfinished one? Maddie frowned. "Only in passing," she said. Something once about a composition she abandoned in 1940, during the war. She called it The Lost Whisper. Poirot nodded slowly. I found the title in her diary. No music written beneath it, just the words, to be played when I'm no longer heard. Maddie's heart gave a small jolt. I thought it was metaphor, perhaps, Poirot said, but I believe it was an invitation. She crossed to the writing desk and opened a shallow drawer where Beatrice's remaining pages were stored. At the back, pressed between two blank sheets, lay an envelope labeled L.W. Maddie opened it with careful hands. Inside, a single line of melody. 7 notes. Simple. Delicate. She read it silently, then walked slowly to the piano and placed it on the stand. Poirot stepped back, his hands folding behind his back. Maddie played. The phrase was haunting, not in its complexity, but in its restraint. It trembled in the air like breath on cold glass. A beginning, waiting for an answer. She paused. Then she answered. Her melody rose in reply, building around it, shaping it gently without consuming it. The notes formed a conversation between the past and the present, between silence and sound. And when she played the final chord, it was not dramatic. It was content. Poirot did not speak for a long moment. Then, it is complete, Mademoiselle Gray. Maddie looked down at the keys, her fingers still resting lightly on them. It is. He gave a small bow. May I take my leave now? She smiled. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Thank you. He reached the door, and just before exiting, he turned. Beatrice's last whisper was not her silence. He said, "It was you." And then he was gone. The following Sunday, the church bell rang once more. The curate opened the doors and found the pews unexpectedly filled. Word had spread Maddie Gray would perform a new piece, dedicated not to Beatrice's death, but to her voice. She sat alone at the organ, a small page of handwritten notes before her, the title at the top. The whisper that froze the room. She began. The melody was soft, unfolding, no longer heavy with accusation or regret. And as it filled the space, the villagers sat still, not in reverence, but in peace, outside. The wind passed gently through the churchyard trees, brushing old stones, lifting fallen petals. And somewhere in the stillness, Beatrice Worsley was. Heard. Not in name. Not in voice. But in the quiet she had once commanded, now shared. Chapter 14. The ink beneath her namiv next morning brought the smell of damp soil, and the chirp of brave birds testing the soft March air. Worsley Cottage, no longer wrapped in frost, felt lighter. Windows opened slightly, curtains fluttering like cautious laughter. Maddie sat at the breakfast table, sorting through a drawer of old correspondence she put off too long. She was not looking for anything, just, as she told herself, clearing space. Clearing space for what came next. And yet, halfway down the stack, she found a small envelope, ivory-colored, sealed not with wax but a dainty gold sticker. Her name in Beatrice's hand, neater, more delicate than usual. Miss Madeleine Gray. No date, no address. She paused, then opened it. Inside, a single folded note. If you find this after the silence, You'll know I've trusted you with everything I could not tame. You were always going to outgrow my shadow. It just took both of us too long to admit it. There's a key in the bookshelf beneath the Fox copy of Milton. Use it. Only if you still care to know. B. Maddie sat back, breath held. She knew the book. The Fox Paradise lost its spine ever so slightly too thick, its pages glued in place. Beatrice had kept it dusted like all the others, always pretending it was red. Maddie rose from her chair and crossed the room. Her fingers closed around the book's spine. It gave a slight resistance, then lifted. Inside, tucked in a velvet hollow, was a brass key, small, ornate, cold. It belonged to the locked cabinet in Beatrice's study, the one that had remained unopened. Since her death, the cabinet creaked as Maddie opened it. The scent of cedar and old perfume lingered inside, as if Beatrice had only just stepped out. There were a few folders, a stack of music programs, a green felt box, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal, not the infamous black ledger, but something more personal, the leather soft, worn smooth along the edges. Maddie opened it with careful hands. Unlike the ledger, this book held no judgments, no observations, only memories. Pages filled with recollections: her parents' wedding, Maddie's first concert at age 8, the first time Beatrice had performed at Covent Garden. Here, at last, was not the teacher, not the whisperer, just Beatrice. She read. They said I was too cold to raise a child. I suppose they weren't wrong. But I tried to make her a fortress, not a prisoner. And somewhere along the way, I forgot she might want to be something else, something softer. The truth is, I envied her. Her fingers, her timing, her instinct for beauty. She could have gone far if I hadn't filled her world with echoes. She is better than me, and I have spent years punishing her for it. Maddie turned the page, slowly. At the top, a heading, The Whisper. I had a melody once. It came to me after the war. 7 notes. They haunted me, stayed with me when I could not sleep. I thought they were someone else's. Perhaps something I'd overheard in a half-bombed theater. But no, they were mine. I never finished the piece. I told myself it was missing something. But the truth was, I was missing someone to hear it. If Maddie ever finds this, perhaps she'll know how to complete it. Perhaps she already has. Maddie closed the journal. Her hands were trembling. She did not cry, but her breath caught, somewhere between grief and understanding. For the first time, she saw Beatrice not as a figure looming behind the curtain, nor as the sharp edge behind a soft smile, but as a woman unsure how to love out loud, a woman who had, at the very end, tried to leave something behind that wasn't made of secrets. That afternoon, Maddie returned to the piano. She laid the journal beside the staff paper and read the final 7-note melody once more. She played it, let it echo, and then, with Beatrice's last memory in her ear, she added a second voice, this time not Felix's theme. Not her own, but something entirely new. A duet between who she was and who she had become. She played until dusk began to stretch its long limbs across the garden path. When she finally looked up, She saw a letter sitting in the windowsill, one the postman must have slipped through. Without knocking, it was from London, from Evangeline Mortimer, the director of a chamber music program at the Royal Academy. Maddie opened it with slow, steady hands. Dear Miss Gray, your piece, The Whisper That Froze the Room, reached us through Mr. Comedy. We were moved not only by the composition's grace, but by its restraint. In it, we heard not ambition, but courage. We would be honored to invite you to perform the piece at our spring concert in April. The theme of the evening is legacy. We think your work defines it. Warmly, Evangeline Mortimer folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Then she looked toward the empty armchair near the fire, Beatrice's old seat. She smiled. You were heard, she whispered. But now, so am I. Chapter 15. Legacy in E. Minor's spring concert at the Royal Academy was not grand in scale, but steeped in tradition. The hall seated just over 200, its wooden walls polished to a quiet gleam, and its chandeliers swayed slightly even when no breeze touched them. Here, every note mattered. Maddie Gray stood backstage, hands folded over her stomach, the score clutched in one hand. The Whisper That Froze the Room, now finalized and signed with a modest MG at the bottom corner, was inked cleanly across 12 pages. Beneath the title, in pencil, for BW, who left the silence behind. She exhaled slowly. Felix Carmody approached from the far side, looking less theatrical than usual. A grey suit, a navy tie, no scarf. His expression was soft, tinged with pride and something quieter, perhaps humility. She would have hated this, he said gently. Maddie smiled. She would have scoffed at the lighting, refused to sit in the front row, and rewritten the program notes. They both chuckled, briefly, before falling into a stillness. Then Felix added, she would have stayed until the end. Maddie looked away, swallowing hard. I wasn't sure if I could finish it, she said. I wasn't sure if it was mine. Felix gestured toward the sheet in her hand. That piece belongs to no one. That's why it matters. From the stage, the host's voice rang out. And our final performance for the evening, a debut composition by Madeleine Gray, The Whisper That Froze the Room. Maddie took a breath and stepped forward. The hall greeted her not with applause, but with stillness, the respectful, expectant, kind. She sat at the piano, placed her fingers lightly on the keys, and let her hands rest there for a moment longer than needed. Then she began. The opening bars were Beatrice's, the 7 notes she had carried across decades. Maddie let them hang briefly in the air before she answered, not with embellishment, but with truth. The themes unfolded like a conversation, sometimes tentative, sometimes overlapping. There were moments of tension, clashes of minor chords that didn't resolve for several bars, just as the truths of Worsley had taken years to unravel. But always, the music returned to stillness, not silence, presence. The second movement carried Maddie's own motif, lighter, quicker, shaped by her years beneath Beatrice's eye, but free now, lifted and refrained by the notes that came. Before and finally, the last page it slowed again, slipping into E minor, soft but grounded. The final bars returned to Beatrice's original phrase, but this time it was played not as a question, but as an answer. No flourish. No fanfare. Just a single note. Held. Released. And then nothing. The room remained utterly still for 5 seconds. 10. Then the applause rose, not loud or wild, but deep, sustained. A tide of hands and hearts meeting the echo Maddie had sent into the world. She stood, bowed once, and stepped down. Backstage, Poirot was waiting. He had travelled down from London without announcement, a dark green coat, cane in hand, watching with those same unreadable eyes. Maddie stepped toward him. "You came. I always arrive for the final act," he said with a modest nod. She gestured toward the stage. "Did it make sense?" Poirot gave a small, rare smile. "It was the first mystery I've ever heard rather than solved." They sat together near the side curtain as the audience began to filter out. "I used to think Beatrice left only pain," Maddie said. "That everything she touched was stained with silence." Poirot adjusted his gloves thoughtfully. "She left pain, yes, but also form, shape. She gave you a frame. You provided the color. I suppose we both composed the ending." He nodded, and both allowed it to end. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Poirot stood. "There is one thing," he said softly, "that has troubled me." Maddie raised an eyebrow. "In her personal journal," he continued, "she wrote of a fear that her music would be forgotten, that her voice would fade." Maddie tilted her head. "But she never published most of it." "No," Poirot agreed, "because she feared judgment, and yet she left it all to you." He paused. "Will you publish her pieces?" Maddie was quiet for a long time. "I think I'll publish some," she said at last. "Not all, only the ones that carry weight without chains." Poirot nodded. "Wise. Legacy is not only what we leave behind, it is what others choose to carry forward." She looked at him, the glow of the stage lights still warm on her cheeks. "Then I'll carry only what lifts." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes kind. "Then you, Mademoiselle Grey, have already become greater than your teacher." And with that, he bowed low, turned, and walked away. Back at Worsley Cottage that evening, Maddie sat once again by the piano, the fire crackling in the hearth. She placed a new blank sheet on the stand, and for the first time in weeks, she began to write something that was wholly her own. Not a continuation, not a whisper, but a beginning. She titled it simply, "The Room Begins to Sing." And then she played not to silence, but into it, final lines, soft fade out, outside. The cottage, the wind no longer howled. It moved gently, as if listening. And inside, through keys both gentle and certain, a legacy was being rewritten note by note. No longer frozen, just finally heard.